There is a fear colder than winter itself, the fear of leaving a dog behind when there is no one left to care for it. In this story, a Navy SEAL witnesses that fear with his own eyes, as an old man who loves his dog more than anything chooses to treat it cruelly, hoping to force it to leave. He believes that if the dog learns to hate him, it might find a better life somewhere else, rather than slowly fading away beside a man whose strength is failing. Where are you watching this Navy SEAL and dog story from today? If this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe, because every follow gives us the motivation to share more meaningful stories like this. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. When the snow knocks. Snow had been falling since noon, the quiet kind that didn't rush, that seemed to decide the world was already loud enough without it. It filled the road in front of the house, softened the fence posts, erased yesterday's footprints. By late afternoon, the sky hung low and colorless, like an old sheet stretched too tight. Elias Mercer stood at the edge of his yard, one gloved hand resting on the top rail of the fence. He was tall, just over 6 feet, built lean and contained, as if every unnecessary motion had been trained out of him long ago. His hair was dark brown, cut short in a way that suggested habit rather than style, a fraction longer than regulation, but still unmistakably military. His face was clean-shaven, the jaw square, cheekbones sharp, skin pale but weathered by northern wind. His eyes, gray-blue and steady, carried the look of someone who had seen chaos and learned not to flinch. He wore the same thing he always wore, a worn olive-gray tactical combat shirt, softened by years of washing, faded at the shoulders and cuffs. Beneath it, a red thermal layer showed faintly at the collar. Old combat pants, brown-green and scuffed at the knees, hung comfortably loose, their cargo pockets sagging with use. His boots were scratched work boots from another life, practical and unpolished. On his wrist, a battered military watch ticked on, stubborn as memory. Behind him, Coda waited. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, sable-coated in shades of cream, gray and black. His build was athletic without bulk, a working dog's body shaped by movement rather than indulgence. Amber eyes watched the falling snow with focused calm. A black harness hugged his chest, edged with a dark red trim that stood out just enough to be noticed. Coda's ears flicked now and then, catching sounds Elias ignored on purpose. The gate bell rang. It wasn't loud, just a simple chime attached to the post, but it cut through the hush like a dropped coin. Coda's head snapped up. His body went still, tail lifting, not wagging. Elias felt it before he understood it, a tightening behind the ribs. He turned toward the gate. A young man stood there, half buried in white. Snow dusted his dark coat and clung to his hair. He looked to be in his late 20s, lean but worn, shoulders slightly hunched against the cold. His face was pale from travel and fatigue, eyes rimmed red as if sleep had been optional for days. He held himself politely, carefully, like someone used to knocking on doors that might not open. Coda let out a low sound, not a growl, not a bark. Something in between. Elias unlatched the gate. "Can I help you?" he asked. The man swallowed. "I'm looking for the Whitman's dog," he said. His voice carried an accent softened by time away, but the name landed heavy. The Golden? Sonny. Elias didn't answer immediately. "I'm Noah," the man continued. "Noah Whitman. I'm their son." For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. Then a blur of gold burst from the side yard. Sonny ran like gravity had finally given up on him. He was a purebred golden retriever, long-haired and bright despite the winter, his coat the color of late afternoon light. He moved fast, clumsy with joy, paws slipping in the snow as he crossed the yard. When he reached the gate, he didn't slow. He launched himself at Noah with a sound halfway between a whine and a laugh, tail beating the air so hard it knocked against the fence. Noah dropped to one knee, arms wrapping around the dog without thinking. Snow scattered. Sonny pressed his head into Noah's chest, twisting, wagging, making small, desperate noises like he was afraid this might vanish if he stopped moving. Noah's breath hitched. He laughed once, sharply, then buried his face in Sonny's neck. Elias watched, something tightening in his throat. Coda stepped forward, then stopped. His tail moved once, slow. He didn't intrude. He stood beside Elias, posture alert, eyes tracking the reunion with a seriousness that didn't belong to dogs, at least not according to people who hadn't lived with one. "I came to take him back," Noah said after a moment, still holding Sonny. If that's all right." Elias nodded. "Come inside," he said. "You'll freeze out here." The house was warm, smelled faintly of coffee and wood. Snow steamed off coats by the door. Noah sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug Elias placed in front of him. His fingers shook, not from cold alone. Sonny lay at his feet, pressed so close it was as if he feared distance itself. Coda sat a few steps away, watching, ears tilted forward, eyes flicking between the man and the golden dog. "I gave him to them," Noah said quietly. "Before I left, thought it would help." Elias leaned against the counter, listening. "They loved him," Noah continued. "He kept the house alive. I didn't know when I'd be back. I didn't want them alone." He stopped. The silence stretched. Elias spoke carefully. "They weren't." Noah looked up. "They weren't alone," Elias repeated. "Not with him." Something crossed Noah's face. Relief, maybe, mixed with regret. "I thought he wouldn't wait," he said. "I thought he'd forget me." Sonny lifted his head, ears flopping, and made a soft, indignant sound. Elias almost smiled. Then Coda did something strange. He rose, walked to the back door, and sat facing it. Not the front where Noah had come in, the back. His ears went forward, rigid. He didn't bark. He didn't move. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. "Coda," he said quietly. The dog didn't turn. Sonny stood too, as if pulled by an invisible thread. He moved to Coda's side, tail slowing, body tense. Both dogs faced the same door, listening. Noah frowned. "What is it?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't know. The moment passed as suddenly as it had come. Coda shook himself and returned to his place. Sonny followed, curling back at Noah's feet. But something had shifted. Elias poured more coffee. The steam curled upward, fragile. "You came a long way," he said. Noah nodded. "Longer than I planned." Outside, the snow kept falling, and somewhere, unseen, the quiet pressed closer, waiting. Chapter 2. Spring and the Oath of Two Dogs. Spring did not arrive all at once in the northern hills. It came in fragments, thin sunlight slipping between bare branches, the sound of meltwater running under ice, the smell of damp earth rising cautiously from the ground. Snow retreated in patches, reluctant, as if it needed proof the cold was truly finished. Elias Mercer noticed these things without meaning to. Habit. Observation had once kept him alive. Now it simply anchored him to the present. Across the narrow road from his house stood the Whitman's place, a modest two-story home with white siding gone slightly gray at the corners. The porch steps creaked the same way every morning. Elias had learned the rhythm of that sound before he ever learned their names. That spring, a new rhythm joined it. A dog's bark, high, eager, untrained, sunny. The golden retriever was still young then, just past a year, his coat thick and bright, catching the light like spun gold. He had the loose-limbed enthusiasm of a dog who believed the world was fundamentally good and mostly designed for running. His tail wagged first, his body following a half-second later, as if joy itself were pulling him forward. Harold Whitman laughed every time Sonny barked. Harold was a tall man, even in age, though time had curved his spine just enough to soften the impression. His hair was thin and silver, always combed back with care, his face long and gentle, the lines around his mouth deepened by decades of smiling more than frowning. He dressed simply, flannel shirts, suspenders, work pants patched at the knee. There was something deliberate about him, a man who did not rush unless necessary. Mabel Whitman moved more slowly, but with a purpose all her own. She was shorter than Harold, rounder in build, her white hair kept in a loose bun that never quite held. Her skin was pale and soft-looking, her eyes sharp behind thin-framed glasses. She spoke less than her husband, but when she did, people tended to listen. Mabel had the steady calm of someone who had raised children, lost people, and learned which worries were worth carrying. Sonny adored them both. Elias first saw it clearly one afternoon when he was repairing a loose board along his fence. The sun was out, the air cold but no longer cruel. Sonny slipped free of his leash and bolted toward the road, barking at nothing in particular, intoxicated by space. Before Elias could straighten, a pair of large dogs appeared from down the street. Thick-bodied, older, their movements slower but heavier. They stopped when they saw Sonny, heads lowered, bodies stiffened. Sonny skidded to a halt, confusion flickering across his face. Coda reacted before Elias did. The German shepherd launched himself forward, his movement clean and decisive. He placed himself between Sonny and the larger dogs, feet planted, shoulders squared. His lips lifted just enough to show teeth, not in frenzy, but in warning. His amber eyes locked onto the intruders, unblinking. The larger dogs hesitated. One growled, low and uncertain. Coda did not answer. He held his ground. Harold shouted from the porch. Mabel clutched her chest, breath caught. Elias moved at last, stepping into the road, his presence tipping the balance. The larger dogs backed away, interest lost. Sonny pressed himself against Coda's side, trembling now, tail tucked. Coda did not move until they were gone. When he finally stepped back, Sonny followed him, nose glued to his shoulder as if imprinting the moment. "That dog of yours," Harold said later, voice still unsteady. "He's got a backbone like steel." Elias shrugged. "He knows his job." Mabel bent down, cupping Coda's face between her hands. "Thank you," she said, as if Coda were a man who could understand words instead of tone. Coda's ears tilted forward. He leaned into her touch. From that day on, something invisible tied the two dogs together. Sonny followed Coda everywhere. He mimicked his movements, copied his pauses, learned when to sit and when to wait just by watching. Coda tolerated this with a patience that surprised even Elias. He corrected Sonny gently, blocking him with a shoulder, placing a paw where he shouldn't step, never snapping, never harsh. Elias noticed the Whitmans watching from their porch, smiles easy, hands often clasped together. There was pride there and relief. The weeks passed, spring strengthened. The Whitmans took Sonny everywhere, short walks to the market, slow loops around the neighborhood, the occasional drive to town. Sonny rode in the back seat like royalty, nose pressed to the window, tongue lolling. Mrs. Lane, who lived 2 houses down, often stopped to talk. She was a narrow woman with dyed auburn hair and an observant gaze that missed little. She liked gossip but preferred truth when she could get it. "They're better with that dog," she said once to Elias, nodding toward the Whitmans' yard. Especially Mabel, gave her something to fuss over. Elias nodded, filing the comment away. Sometimes, late in the afternoon, he'd see Harold sitting on the porch steps, Sonny sprawled across his feet, Coda lying a few yards away like a sentry. Mabel would bring out lemonade or tea, moving carefully, one hand on the railing. Those moments felt balanced. Then came the small changes. Harold forgot where he'd set his gloves. Mabel laughed it off at first, teasing him gently. Sonny noticed before anyone else did. He followed Harold more closely, hovering, watching. Elias caught Coda staring at the Whitmans' house longer than usual, ears twitching toward sounds that weren't there. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Coda refused to come inside. He stood at the edge of the yard, facing the road, tail still. When Elias called him, Coda looked back once, eyes intent, then returned, obedience intact, but reluctance evident. Elias felt the unease settle in his chest like a stone dropped quietly into water. Spring ended, summer edged closer, and without warning, the balance broke. It happened on an ordinary morning. Mabel collapsed in the kitchen while the kettle boiled. Harold heard the sound, sharp and wrong, and found her on the floor. Sonny stood over her, barking once, then again, as if calling the world back into place. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. The house changed after that, not louder, quieter. Sonny waited by the door every morning, then lay down when Mabel did not come. Harold sat at the kitchen table longer than necessary, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. He still fed Sonny, still brushed his coat, but his movements slowed, as if each action required deliberate effort. Elias began stopping by more often. He didn't say much, neither did Harold. They shared coffee in silence while Sonny lay between them, a living bridge. Coda stayed close to Sonny, resting his chin on the golden dog's back, eyes half-lidded but alert. One afternoon, Harold spoke, voice rough. "He's too smart," he said, nodding at Sonny. "Knows when something's wrong." Elias nodded. "Dogs usually do." Harold's gaze lingered on Sonny longer than necessary. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "that makes it harder." Sonny lifted his head, ears pricked, as if he sensed the weight behind the words. Coda stood and moved closer to Harold, sitting within arm's reach. Harold's hand dropped to his head automatically, fingers curling into the thick fur. For a moment, just a moment, Elias felt the unmistakable sense that something unseen had acknowledged a turning point. The season shifted again, and the oath between two dogs, unspoken, unceremonious, settled deeper than any human promise. Chapter 3. The House. After her breath. The house did not become silent all at once. It learned how to be quiet. After the funeral, after the neighbors stopped bringing casseroles wrapped in foil, after the driveway no longer filled with unfamiliar cars, the Whitman house settled into a new rhythm, one built around absence. The refrigerator hummed louder, floorboards spoke more often, wind pressed against the siding, as if checking whether anyone inside would answer. Sonny noticed first. The golden retriever was no longer the reckless, bouncing creature of early spring. He still carried the same bright coat, long gold hair catching what little light Vermont's overcast skies allowed. But his movements had slowed, sharpened by attention. He waited now. He listened. Every morning, he walked to the kitchen doorway and sat there, head tilted slightly to the left, eyes fixed on the empty space beside the counter where Mabel used to stand. His ears flicked when the kettle whistled, then flattened when no familiar steps followed the sound. Harold Whitman watched this from the table. He sat with his back straight, hands folded, his long fingers trembling just enough to notice if one was looking. His hair, always carefully combed, seemed thinner now, the scalp beneath more visible in the pale morning light. He still wore his flannel shirts, buttoned all the way up even indoors, suspenders resting on shoulders that had begun to slope inward, as if bracing against an invisible weight. Mabel's chair remained where it had always been. Harold did not move it. He drank his coffee slowly, eyes unfocused, listening to Sonny's breathing, to the clock on the wall, to the sound of his own pulse in his ears. Sometimes he reached out and rested a hand on Sonny's head, fingers sinking into the warm fur, grounding himself in something that still responded. Across the road, Elias Mercer noticed the change without being told. He saw it in the way the porch light stayed on, later than necessary. In the way Harold's steps down the stairs grew more deliberate. In the way Sonny no longer pulled at his leash when they crossed paths, but walked pressed against Harold's leg, as if afraid the man might drift away if not anchored. Elias began stopping by more often. He didn't announce it. He simply crossed the road with a spare cup of coffee or a bag of groceries, knocked once, and waited. Harold always answered, polite, grateful, embarrassed in that quiet way men get when they realize they need help but don't know how to ask for it. Coda came with Elias every time. The German Shepherd moved through the Whitman house like a visitor who understood the rules without being taught. He did not run. He did not bark. He chose a spot near Sonny and lay there, head up, eyes alert. His presence was steady, deliberate, like a post driven into the ground. Sonny gravitated toward him, without thinking. The two dogs lay together often, their bodies forming a loose V shape on the floor. Sonny pressed his flank against Coda's chest, breathing in rhythm. Coda allowed it, shifting only when necessary, his amber eyes tracking Harold's movements as closely as Sonny's did. One afternoon, Elias found Harold standing in the hallway, staring at a framed photograph. It showed Mabel in her garden, dirt on her hands, smiling at something outside the frame. The photo was old, the colors slightly faded. "I keep thinking she's in the other room," Harold said without turning. His voice was calm, but there was a thinness to it, like glass stretched too far. "Then I remember." Elias nodded. He did not offer comfort he did not believe in. Sonny stood behind Harold, tail low, watching the man's shoulders. "She talked to him," Harold went on, nodding toward the dog. "All the time, like he understood every word." "Maybe he did," Elias said. Harold's mouth twitched. "That's what scares me." The weeks passed. Summer edged closer, but the house remained in its own season. Harold began to forget small things, where he'd left his keys, whether he'd already fed Sonny. Once, Elias arrived to find Sonny sitting rigidly by an empty bowl, eyes fixed on the kitchen doorway, as if guarding the space against further neglect. "I must have thought I did," Harold said, shaken. He filled the bowl twice that day, apologizing to the dog both times. Elias suggested calling the doctor. Harold resisted at first, then agreed. Dr. Alan Brooks came on a Thursday morning. He was a man in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, with dark hair graying at the temples and a neatly trimmed beard that framed a serious mouth. His voice was gentle but firm, his movements economical. He had delivered half the town's children and signed more death certificates than he cared to count. He examined Harold carefully, asking questions, checking reflexes, listening longer than necessary. "Grief does things to the body," he said afterward, standing in the kitchen with Elias while Harold sat at the table, "especially at your age." Sonny lay under the table, chin resting on Harold's foot. "And the forgetfulness?" Elias asked. Dr. Brooks hesitated. "Could be stress, could be more. We'll monitor it." Harold nodded, accepting the uncertainty with a kind of tired dignity. After the doctor left, Harold stood by the window for a long time. "She would have hated this," he said. "Being watched. Me being watched." Sonny whined softly. That night, Elias dreamed of empty rooms. He woke before dawn, heart racing. Coda already sitting upright beside the bed, ears pricked toward the road. Elias listened. There was nothing, no sound, no movement. Still, Coda did not lie back down. The feeling lingered through the morning. Over the next few days, Elias noticed changes that didn't sit right. Harold's patience wore thin, not always, not predictably, but enough to unsettle. Once, when Sonny tracked mud across the kitchen floor, Harold snapped. His voice rose sharp and sudden, cutting through the room like a crack of ice. Sonny froze, ears flattening, body low. Harold's face collapsed almost immediately. He crouched down, hands shaking, pulling the dog close. "I didn't mean it," he whispered. "I didn't mean it." Sonny licked his cheek, tail wagging tentatively. Elias watched from the doorway, unease threading through his chest. The rehook came on a quiet evening, when the sky hung low and gray, and the air felt heavy with unspent rain. Elias was leaving the Whitman house when Coda stopped short at the threshold. He refused to cross it. His body stiffened, ears angled sharply forward, nose lifting as if catching a scent no one else could. He stared into the living room, not at Harold, not at Sonny, but at the empty chair, the one Mabel used to sit in. Sonny noticed. He rose and followed Coda's gaze, tail still, eyes wide. Both dogs stood facing the chair, unmoving. Harold looked from one to the other, confusion deepening into something like fear. "What is it?" he asked. Neither dog moved. The moment stretched, thin and taut. Then Coda turned away, walked outside, and sat in the yard, back straight, as if standing guard over something that could not be seen. Elias felt a chill run through him, not cold, but recognition. The moment passed. The dogs returned to themselves. The chair remained empty. But the house did not forget. From that day on, Harold's moods grew more unpredictable. He slept less. He paced. He began spending long stretches staring out the window, watching Sonny play with Coda in the yard, his expression unreadable. One evening, as Elias stood to leave, Harold spoke quietly. "He won't leave," he said. Elias turned. "Sonny?" Harold nodded. "Even if I tell him to. Even if I try to push him away." Sonny stood at his feet, looking up, tail sweeping the floor. "I don't know what to do," Harold admitted. Elias met his gaze. "You don't have to decide tonight." Harold nodded, but his eyes drifted back to the dog. As Elias crossed the road home, Coda walking close at his side, he felt the unmistakable sense of a fault line forming, slow, silent, inevitable. Inside the Whitman house, Sonny lay down beside Harold's chair and closed his eyes, content simply to be near. Outside, the season continued to turn, and something unseen began to lean in. Chapter 4. The Cruelty That Was Love. The first time Elias heard Harold raise his voice at Sonny, it startled him more than a gunshot ever had. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was sharp. A thin cutting sound that did not belong in that house. Sonny had tracked mud across the kitchen floor. It was late afternoon, light slanting low through the window, dust motes hanging like unfinished thoughts. Harold stood by the sink, sleeves rolled up, hands wet. When he turned and saw the dark streaks on the linoleum, something inside him snapped, not loudly, not completely, but enough. Enough, Harold said. The word landed hard. Sonny froze mid-step. His tail stopped. His ears flattened, not in fear exactly, but in confusion, the kind that comes when a rule changes without warning. Harold's face changed almost immediately. The sharpness drained out of him, replaced by something pale and shaken. He crouched down with a groan, knees protesting, and reached for Sonny. "I didn't mean it," he whispered. "I didn't mean it like that." Sonny crept forward, cautious now, and licked Harold's cheek. His tail wagged once, slow, forgiving. Elias stood in the doorway, unseen, the grocery bag heavy in his hand. He stayed where he was, not because he didn't care, but because he understood what it was to lose control for a moment and hate yourself for it afterward. That night, Elias lay awake longer than usual. Coda lay on the floor beside the bed, head on his paws, eyes open. The dog had been restless all evening, pacing, pausing by the window, returning to lie down without fully settling. His ears twitched at every distant sound. "You feel it too," Elias murmured. Coda did not respond. He did not need to. The days that followed brought more moments like the first, small, jarring, inconsistent. Harold forgot to refill Sonny's water bowl. Once, he left the back door open too long, then slammed it shut with unnecessary force when the cold crept in. Sonny adjusted, shrinking himself just a little, staying closer, moving more carefully. Elias spoke to Dr. Brooks again. "He's not dangerous," the doctor said, rubbing a hand over his beard. "But grief rewires things, adds static. People lose their filters." Elias nodded. He had seen men unravel in quieter ways. Then came the phone call. It was early evening when Elias's phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Mercer?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Sarah Whitlock from the County Animal Welfare Office." Her voice was calm, measured, not cold, professional. Elias pictured her before he ever saw her, someone who had learned how to keep emotion from spilling into her work. "Yes," Elias said. "Is something wrong?" "There was a visit today," Sarah continued. "An elderly gentleman, Harold Whitman." Elias closed his eyes. "He brought in a golden retriever," she said. "Sonny, he said he wanted to surrender him." The world narrowed. Sarah explained the details carefully. She was in her late 30s, Elias would later learn, tall and slender, with dark blonde hair pulled back into a low ponytail that never quite stayed neat. Her skin was lightly freckled, weathered by years spent outdoors, and her eyes were the clear, searching gray of someone who watched closely and missed very little. She spoke gently, but there was steel beneath it, a woman who had seen animals abandoned for every reason imaginable and learned which stories rang true. "He didn't look like someone giving up a dog," she said. "He looked like someone trying to do something he couldn't finish." Sonny, she explained, had a microchip. Clean health record. No signs of long-term neglect. When separated from Harold, he'd gone rigid, then refused food. Wouldn't lie down. Wouldn't settle. He kept watching the door, Sarah said. Not panicking, just waiting. They had kept Sonny overnight for observation. The next morning, he still hadn't eaten. "So we brought him back," Sarah said. "Legally, he was still Harold's. Ethically—" She paused. "I thought it was better for the dog." Elias thanked her and hung up. He crossed the road immediately. Harold answered the door with a stiffness that hadn't been there before. His eyes were red, his movements abrupt. "He came back," Harold said before Elias could speak. "I didn't ask them to." Sonny stood behind him, pressed to the wall, eyes flicking between the two men. Harold's hands shook. "He won't leave," Harold said, voice rising. "I tried to do the right thing." "You don't have to decide everything today," Elias said, keeping his tone even. Harold laughed once, short, bitter. "That's the problem. I do." From that day on, the line Harold walked grew thinner. Sometimes he was gentle, brushing Sonny's coat with slow, careful strokes. Sometimes he was distant, shutting himself in the bedroom for hours. And sometimes, too often, his frustration spilled over. He shouted when Sonny barked at passing cars. He shoved him outside when the dog followed him too closely. Once, Elias arrived just in time to see Harold raise his hand, stop himself, then strike the wall instead. Sonny flinched anyway. Elias stepped in when he could. He spoke quietly. He stood between man and dog without touching either. But there were limits to what he could do, to what the law allowed. Coda's behavior changed. The German Shepherd stopped lying down in the Whitman house. He stood or sat, always positioned between Sonny and Harold when the man's voice sharpened. His body language was rigid, controlled, eyes locked on Harold's hands. Harold noticed. "That dog of yours doesn't trust me," he said one afternoon, not accusing, observing. "He's watching," Elias replied. "So am I," Harold said softly. The rehook came on a cold morning when frost still clung to the grass despite the season. Elias was inside the Whitman house when a sharp yelp cut through the air. Sonny stumbled backward, skidding on the floor. Harold stood over him, breathing hard, his hand raised, not in motion, but trembling. For a split second, Coda moved. He stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Harold and Sonny, shoulders lifted, head low. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stood. The room froze. Harold stared at the dog, realization dawning slowly, painfully. His hand dropped. "I'm not a monster," he said, voice breaking. "No," Elias said. "You're scared." Harold sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I don't want him to see me like this," he whispered. "I don't want him to remember me this way." Sonny crept forward and laid his head against Harold's knee. The weeks blurred together. Harold began leaving Sonny outside more often, sometimes for hours. He skipped meals. Sometimes he fed Sonny late, sometimes twice. Elias tried to correct gently, but the pattern worsened. "It's better if he learns to be without me," Harold insisted. Elias argued. Sarah checked in. Dr. Brooks increased visits. Still, the decline continued. By early winter, the nights grew colder. Snow returned in tentative sheets. One evening, Elias stood on his porch, watching Sonny sit alone in the Whitman's yard, breath fogging the air. Coda pressed against Elias's leg, whining softly. Elias crossed the road and brought Sonny inside that night. Harold did not object, but the look in his eyes, hollow, resolute, told Elias the decision had already been made. As Elias led Sonny back home, Coda walking close, he felt the weight of an approaching storm, not just of weather, but of consequence. Love, he thought, could wound as deeply as it healed, and sometimes the most dangerous thing a person could do was believe they were sparing someone else pain. Chapter 5. The night the snow nearly won. Snow returned without warning. It did not drift in politely the way it sometimes did in early winter. It arrived heavy and fast, thick flakes swallowing sound, blurring distance, pressing the world inward. By nightfall, the road between Elias Mercer's house and the Whitmans was already half buried, tire tracks filling in as if the ground itself wished to forget movement. Elias felt the change long before he saw it. The air had a weight to it, a pressure that settled into the lungs. The kind of cold that did not sting at first, only tightened, quietly, until breathing felt like work. He checked the forecast once, then turned the radio off. Experience had taught him that storms rarely announced the moment they became dangerous. Inside, the house was warm. Wood cracked softly in the stove. The clock ticked. Coda lay near the door, not asleep. The German Shepherd's body was rigid, head lifted, ears angled forward. His sable coat caught the firelight in muted shades of gray and black. The black harness with its dark red trim rested snug against his chest, rising and falling with his breath. His amber eyes fixed on the door, as if it might speak. "You're not wrong," Elias murmured, pulling on his jacket. Coda rose instantly. Elias stepped onto the porch. Snow swirled sideways, driven by a wind that cut through layers like it knew the shortest path to skin. He looked across the road. The Whitman house was dark. No porch light, no movement. The yard lay white and unbroken, the fence line nearly invisible beneath drifts. Elias hesitated. Harold had been withdrawing for weeks now, locking doors earlier, drawing curtains, insisting he was fine. Elias had respected that, perhaps longer than he should have. Coda whined once, low, urgent. Then he scratched at the door. The sound snapped Elias into motion. He crossed the road with effort, boots sinking into snow that had already begun to crust. Wind tore at his breath. Halfway across, he saw it. A shape in the yard, small, huddled, wrong. "Sonny," Elias breathed. The golden retriever lay curled near the fence, his long golden coat matted with snow. white clinging to his back and sides like a second skin. His chest moved, barely. Each breath came shallow and slow, a fragile thing fighting the cold inch by inch. Elias dropped to his knees, snow soaking through his pants instantly. He pressed a hand against Sonny's side. The dog flinched weakly. "Hey," Elias said, voice steady by instinct alone. "Stay with me." Sonny's eyes opened a fraction. They were dull, unfocused, rimmed with frost. His tail did not move. Elias scooped him up, surprised by how light he felt, how little resistance there was in the body that had once been all warmth and motion. Snow packed into Elias's collar, melted down his spine, but he did not feel it. He turned toward the house. "Harold!" he shouted, pounding on the door with his shoulder. "Harold!" There was no answer. Coda circled anxiously, whining, his breath puffing white clouds into the air. He pressed close to Sonny's dangling head, licking at the frozen fur, then looked up at Elias as if asking why this was happening. Elias kicked the door harder. The lock gave way with a crack. Inside, the house was cold. Not unlivable, but wrong. The thermostat was turned down, curtains drawn tight. The living room smelled faintly of stale coffee and something metallic beneath it. "Harold!" Elias called again. A light flicked on in the kitchen. Harold appeared in the doorway, wrapped in an old sweater, his frame smaller somehow, shoulders hunched. His hair stood up in uneven tufts, his face pale and drawn. When he saw Sonny, something broke. "Oh," Harold whispered. "Oh no." Elias laid Sonny on the rug near the fire and stripped off his own jacket, wrapping it around the dog's trembling body. He rubbed Sonny's chest briskly, speaking constantly, grounding both of them in sound. Harold stood frozen for a moment, then moved. He shuffled to the stove and poured milk into a pot, hands shaking so badly it sloshed onto the counter. He set it to warm, not boiling, murmuring apologies under his breath, words tumbling over one another without order. "I didn't think," Harold said. "I thought he'd go to your place. He always does when it gets cold. I didn't think—" Coda lay down beside Sonny, pressing his body against the golden retriever's side, sharing heat without instruction. His head rested over Sonny's neck, breath steady, eyes watchful. Elias worked methodically, checking gums, feeling for pulse, adjusting Sonny's position to ease breathing. Years of first aid, human and otherwise, took over. "Why was he outside?" Elias asked, not accusing. "Not yet." Harold sat heavily in his chair, the same one Mabel used to occupy. He stared at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I needed him to go," he said hoarsely. "I needed him to leave before this." He gestured vaguely at himself, at the house, at the future pressing in from all sides. "I tried," Harold went on. "I tried everything else. I took him to the shelter. He came back. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't lie down, just waited. So I thought, if I made it hard enough, he'd choose someone else." His voice cracked. "I didn't think the cold would come like this." The milk warmed. Harold brought it over in a bowl, kneeling awkwardly, spilling half as he tried to hold it steady. Elias dipped a finger in first, testing the temperature, then guided a few drops into Sonny's mouth. Sonny swallowed weakly. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They worked in silence after that. Fire fed. Blankets layered, gentle pressure, steady words. Outside, the storm raged. The re-hook came not with drama, but with stillness. At some point, Elias never knew when, Sonny's breathing steadied, not strong, but present. His eyes focused, just enough to track movement. Harold reached out, hesitant, and rested his hand on Sonny's back. Sonny leaned into it. Coda lifted his head and looked directly at Harold. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't pleading. It was assessing. Harold met the dog's gaze and did not look away. "I didn't mean to hurt him," Harold said quietly. "I thought I was sparing him." Elias finally sat back on his heels. "Sometimes," he said, "love doesn't know when to stop trying." Harold nodded, tears slipping down his face unchecked. "I was afraid he'd watch me disappear." "He would've," Elias said, "but that's not cruelty." Coda lowered his head again, satisfied for now. By morning, the storm had eased. The world outside lay buried, transformed. Sunlight filtered weakly through clouds, turning snowfields into blinding white expanses. Sonny slept near the fire, chest rising and falling, with more certainty now. Coda remained beside him, a silent sentinel. Harold sat in his chair, exhausted, emptied. When Elias finally stood to leave, Harold caught his sleeve. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. Elias looked down at the man, at the fear, the guilt, the stubborn love that refused to die. "You don't have to fix everything today," he said. "You just have to keep him alive." Harold nodded. As Elias stepped back into the cold, Coda following close, he glanced once more at the Whitman house. The snow had nearly won. Nearly. Chapter 6. The Long Howl. The house breathed differently after that night. Not warmer, not safer. Just aware. Harold Whitman woke before dawn now, every morning, without fail. Sometimes it was the ache in his chest that pulled him from sleep, a tightness that made him sit up slowly and count his breaths until the room steadied. Other times it was Sonny, shifting, sighing, lifting his head from the rug beside the bed, as if checking whether Harold was still there. Sonny had survived the storm, but he was not the same dog. His golden coat had lost some of its careless shine, the long hair lying flatter against his body, duller at the edges. He moved more cautiously now, conserving energy, watching before acting. His eyes, once bright with easy trust, held something deeper, an attentiveness shaped by loss narrowly avoided. Coda noticed everything. The German shepherd rarely left Sonny's side. When Harold moved, Coda tracked him. When Sonny slept, Coda slept lighter. The red-edged black harness was never removed now, not even indoors, as if Elias understood that this was no longer just a dog. It was a warning system. Harold tried. He truly did. In the days following the storm, he fed Sonny on schedule, sometimes sitting on the floor beside him to make sure he ate. He brushed the dog's coat with slow, careful strokes, murmuring apologies that tangled with his breath. He spoke to Sonny as Mabel once had, narrating small tasks, filling the house with words so silence could not press too hard. But effort could not stop the body's slow betrayal. Harold's cough deepened, settling into his chest like a permanent resident. His hands trembled more often now, even at rest. He forgot what day it was. Forgot whether he had already taken his pills. Elias noticed the way Harold leaned against furniture when he thought no one was watching, the way his pauses stretched longer between movements, the way his eyes sometimes drifted past Sonny, past Coda, to something farther away. Dr. Alan Brooks increased his visits. The doctor's face had grown more serious over time, the easy reassurance stripped away. He listened longer to Harold's lungs, pressed his stethoscope in silence, jaw tight beneath his trimmed beard. "You're pushing too hard," Dr. Brooks said gently one afternoon. "Your body needs rest." Harold smiled faintly. "It doesn't have much left to rest with." Sonny lay at his feet, chin on Harold's slipper, ears twitching at every change in tone. Sarah Whitlock stopped by once more, her tall frame filling the doorway awkwardly as she removed her boots. She looked tired, lines of strain faint around her eyes. "I just wanted to see how he was doing," she said, nodding toward Sonny. Sonny stood, tail wagging cautiously, recognition flickering across his face. He sniffed Sarah's hands, then leaned into her knee. "He remembers you," she said softly. "Dogs don't forget," Harold replied. Sarah hesitated. "Sometimes they know things we don't." Harold looked away. Winter deepened. Snow no longer came in dramatic storms, but in steady accumulation. Days blurred together. Nights grew longer. Harold's strength faded in small increments, so small that no single moment felt like the end. He still rose every morning, still filled Sonny's bowl, still opened the door so Coda and Sonny could stand together on the porch and sniff the cold air. But one evening, he did not eat. Sonny noticed immediately. He stood by the table, tail still, eyes fixed on Harold's untouched plate. He nudged Harold's knee gently with his nose. "I'm not hungry, boy," Harold said. Sonny did not move. Coda watched from the doorway, body tense. That night, Harold's breathing changed. It grew wet, uneven. Elias arrived after dark, responding to a call Harold barely remembered making. The house smelled of menthol and old wood, the air thick and stale. Harold sat in his chair, shoulders slumped, eyes half-lidded. Sonny lay pressed against his feet, chest rising too fast, matching Harold's labored rhythm. Dr. Brooks arrived shortly after, coat dusted with snow, expression grave. They spoke in low voices in the kitchen. "He's failing," the doctor said simply. "Days, maybe less." Elias nodded, jaw tight. When they returned to the living room, Harold looked up. "I know," he said. Sonny lifted his head sharply, ears pricked. The rehook came then, not loud, not sudden, but profound. Sonny stood. He moved slowly to Harold's front, placed his paws carefully on the man's knees, and rested his head against Harold's chest. He stayed there, unmoving, his breathing steadying as if offering it in exchange. Harold's hands came up automatically, cradling Sonny's head. For the first time in weeks, his breathing eased. Dr. Brooks watched in silence. "I've seen this before," he said quietly to Elias. "Not often." Elias understood. The night stretched on. Eventually, Harold slept. Elias and Dr. Brooks left quietly, agreeing to return at first light. Coda remained behind, lying near Sonny, eyes never closing fully. The end came before morning. Harold woke coughing, the sound harsh and tearing. He reached for the glass of water on the table beside him, his hand falling short. The room swam. His chest burned. He knew. He turned his head slightly. "Sonny," he whispered. The golden retriever was at his side instantly. Harold rested his hand in the thick fur behind Sonny's ears, the familiar place where Mabel's fingers had once lingered. "You were enough," he said. "You always were." His breath rattled once, then again, then stopped. Sonny did not move. He stayed where he was, head pressed against Harold's chest, as if waiting for the rise that never came. Minutes passed. The clock ticked. Snow whispered against the window. Then Sonny lifted his head. He looked around the room, at the empty chair, the dim lamp, the still body, and he howled. It was not a bark, not a whine. It was a long, drawn-out sound that cut through the house and into the night, echoing across the frozen road. A sound older than language, a sound of loss acknowledged and accepted. Across the road, Elias froze. Coda rose, ears snapping forward. He did not bark. He did not move. He simply stood, listening. Elias pulled on his coat and crossed the road in silence. By the time he entered the Whitman house, Sonny had curled up beside Harold's body, his head resting on the man's arm. His eyes were open, dry, watchful. Coda approached slowly and lay down beside him, touching shoulder to shoulder. No one spoke. Morning arrived pale and cold. The authorities came. Dr. Brooks signed the papers. Mrs. Lane wept softly in the kitchen. Sarah arrived later, standing quietly near the door, eyes lowered in respect. Sonny did not resist when they moved Harold. He watched, then lay back down. Only when the house emptied did he rise and walk to the chair. Mabel's chair. He lay there and closed his eyes. The house was quiet again, but this time it was final. Chapter 7. After the storm, a thin light. The house learned how to hold grief the way a body learns to breathe after pain, slowly, unevenly, with effort. In the days after Harold Whitman's passing, the rooms were rearranged by necessity rather than intention. Chairs moved to make space for visitors, the table filled with paper and envelopes and signatures. The clock on the wall kept time for no one in particular. Sonny watched it all. He moved carefully now, the way a dog does when the ground beneath him has changed without warning. His golden coat was brushed and clean, but it lay flatter than it once had, the shine muted. He slept in short intervals, often waking to check the empty chair before settling again. When he lay down, it was always close to something that had once been Harold's. Shoes by the door, the leg of the table, the edge of the chair. Coda stayed near him, a quiet presence, never forcing play, never pushing. The German shepherd's amber eyes followed Sonny's movements with patient attention. His black harness, trimmed in dark red, was scuffed now, the mark of days spent pacing and waiting. He lay with his back to the door when strangers came, his body a boundary, his calm an anchor. Elias Mercer moved through the house with the same restraint he brought to everything else. He spoke when necessary. He listened more than he talked. He carried boxes, made calls, brewed coffee that went mostly untouched. When Noah Whitman arrived, the house shifted again. Noah looked older than when Elias had last seen him. Travel and loss had carved lines into his face, sharpened his features. His hair was longer now, dark and unkempt, his beard grown out in a way that suggested weeks without mirrors rather than fashion. He stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside, shoulders squared as if bracing for impact. Sonny saw him and froze. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Sonny moved, slowly, cautiously, until he reached Noah's legs. He pressed his head there, not wagging, not whining, just leaning, his weight a question and an answer all at once. Noah dropped to his knees. "I'm sorry," he whispered into Sonny's fur. "I should have come sooner." Sonny licked his hand once, then settled beside him, close enough to feel the warmth. The days that followed were full of necessary things: meetings, arrangements, paperwork. Noah handled most of it with a focus that surprised Elias, as if he had stored this strength somewhere for emergencies. But when the work was done, the quiet returned. It was in that quiet that Sonny began to fade. He stopped eating first. Not all at once, just a few missed meals, then more. He drank water only when prompted. He no longer followed Coda outside. He lay by the chair in the yard where Harold and Mabel had once sat, head on his paws, eyes open but distant. Noah noticed. So did Elias. The veterinarian came. The examination was thorough. The diagnosis was simple. "He's grieving," the vet said gently. And he's not alone. Noah sat on the porch steps that night, elbows on his knees, staring out at the snow-darkened yard. Sonny lay at his feet, unmoving. "I have to go back," Noah said eventually. "There are things I can't leave undone." Elias nodded. He had known this was coming. "I'll take him with me," Noah continued, his voice uncertain. "For now, I think he needs to know he still has someone." Coda, lying nearby, lifted his head at the sound of Noah's voice. His ears tilted forward, then flattened slightly. He did not move. Sonny did not react at all. The rehook came the following evening, quiet and unassuming. Elias was in the kitchen when he heard it. A sound so small he almost missed it. A soft, broken whine. He stepped onto the porch. Sonny lay in the snow beside the chair, his body too still, his breath shallow. Coda stood over him, tail low, eyes fixed on Elias, urgency written into every line of his posture. Elias knelt, placing a hand on Sonny's side. The dog stirred faintly. "He's giving up," Elias said softly. Noah joined them on the porch, his face pale. He knelt too, calling Sonny's name, his voice tight. Sonny's eyes fluttered, unfocused. Elias made a decision. "Call him," he said. Noah looked up. "Who?" "You." Noah hesitated, then fumbled for his phone. He dialed the number he knew by muscle memory, the one that had connected him to home for years from faraway places. When the line picked up, he put it on speaker. Sonny's ears twitched. Noah swallowed. "Hey boy," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "It's me." Sonny's head lifted a fraction. "I know," Noah went on. "I know it hurts, but I need you to stay. Just a little longer. I need you to wait for me." Sonny's tail moved once. Coda stepped closer, pressing his shoulder gently against Sonny's side. "I'll come back," Noah said, his voice breaking now. "I promise. I'll come back and we'll walk the same roads again. You don't have to go anywhere yet." Sonny's breath hitched, then, slowly, he pushed himself upright. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was effort, pure and visible. He stood, swayed, then sat again, eyes clearer now, fixed on the phone in Noah's hand. No one spoke. From that night on, Sonny ate again. Not much, but enough. Days passed. Strength returned in increments. He followed Coda into the yard again, stood in the sun when it appeared, let himself be brushed. The day Noah left was cold but bright. Snow covered the ground in a clean, unbroken sheet. The sky held a pale light, thin but persistent. Noah knelt beside Sonny one last time, fastening the leash with careful hands. "I'll be back," he said. "I mean it." Sonny leaned into him, then stepped back, looking once toward the chair, then toward Elias, then toward Coda. Coda stood still, tail low but steady. He did not whine. He did not bark. He simply watched, his amber eyes reflecting the light. When Noah and Sonny walked down the road, Elias remained on the porch. Coda sat beside him, shoulder to knee. The snow fell softly, but beyond it, the light held. Sometimes, the miracles we wait for do not arrive as thunder or light from the sky. They arrive quietly, through loyalty that refuses to leave, through love that stays even when it is painful, through a life that chooses to keep breathing one more day. Perhaps this is how God works most often, not by removing sorrow, but by placing something faithful beside us so we can endure it. In our daily lives, we all carry losses that no one else can see. We all face moments when giving up feels easier than staying. And yet, again and again, we are given signs, through people, through animals, through unexpected kindness, that we are not walking alone. If this story touched something in your heart, let it remind you to look closely at the quiet blessings already around you. Let it remind you that faith does not always roar. Sometimes it waits. If you believe in these small miracles, please share this story so it can reach someone who may need hope tonight. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you, or share a moment in your own life when love carried you through darkness. And if you would like to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and walk with us again. May God bless you, protect you, and give you strength for every unseen battle you are fighting.